Thank you so much for joining us in the session today. Obviously hosted and sponsored by OneLogic. Lena and myself will be hosting you today on the topic of inclusion in big data. It's really an honor for us to be here at the Diversity Stories That Matter. And I will start the session with you. I'm Colleen Arend, Principal Online Marketing Manager here at OneLogic, and co-hosting our session today is my colleague Lena, our Online Marketing Manager. We've tried to design the session as interactive as possible, so please use the chat functionality, either in English or German, to post your answers and interact with the questions that we'll pose you. We really want this to be a two-way conversation, and look forward to doing this with you. So the topic that we chose was inclusion in big data, but not everybody understands what big data is. What are the connotations or things that you associate with the term big data? Please feel free to post those into the chat. But there is a formal definition, and that's really meeting these 5 criteria. And that's where a large amount of data is collected. It's collected passively, mostly through digital interactions with a great variety. So from different channels, different digital touch points. And this happens at a very, very high rate. So whether we're engaging with social media, interacting with a website, using an application, using company software, all in the back end, that big data is being collected and sitting in data silos. But what do we actually do with this big data? So there's actually a lot of business value we can create from that. We can gain insights and business intelligence from this data, from analyzing it or breaking down those silos, and tapping into that unused data to create new business value. They often can use this big data to improve company efficiency, operations, optimize supply chains, reduce CO2 emissions. We can obviously make faster decision-making because this data will tell us different insights. And then obviously we can also optimize customer experiences, so we can understand through big data what information need to be addressed on which platform, on which device, what sort of inquiries are being made into the data. And then we can also predict the future. So from things to predicting about how much toilet paper needs to go back onto the shelves during Corona, to planning how we prepare for future pandemics, being able to forecast revenue for companies. There's so many other very valuable things that we can analyze and predict from the data. Lena, has anybody commented in the chat? No, nothing there. Okay, good. So yeah, please still feel free to type in the chat what you guys associate or what we all associate with the term big data. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But beyond the data itself, big data spreads out into almost every single industry, every single job title. Even myself and Lena, we use big data almost on a daily basis to inform our decisions, give us insights on how we should optimize our marketing campaigns. Okay. And use that to create new value for our customers or for our users that are engaging with our content. So we can just see that big data, although we think that this is normally something for data scientists, data analysts, engineers, it's actually something that affects our daily lives in almost every single product and service that we consume in the modern world. Just to see how big this impact is on our lives, I've collected here some interesting facts. So by 2025, there are going to be over 465, okay, I'll check that now, 463 exabytes of data that will be created in these data lakes, databases, and so on. I mean, that's for the millennial and older generation joining us today, that's equivalent to over 2 million DVDs. That's just mind-blowing that so much data is collected at that speed in the next 3 to 5 years. We also see that there's a massive demand and massive increase in investment in AI and big data. almost 100% of companies are now saying that they need to invest in this because it's becoming such an important and integral part of the products and services that they deliver and decisions that they make in their businesses. Around 95% of these companies also say that they don't understand big data. They don't know how to manage it. It's so unstructured, data sitting in silos. And this is sort of holding them back from creating this new business value. So we can see there's also a massive demand to support them in that. And if we don't create that support in our ecosystems, then it will impact everybody's daily lives as consumers and people that make use of these products and services. The demand for data science has also drastically increased in the last 2 years. In 2020, we had an increase in demand of over 28% in America. And by 2021, by the end of this year, there will be 2.7 million data science jobs opening in the US alone. Germany is thankfully following this trend greatly, and we're in a massive demand in the market for data specialists. Within the STEM professions, so that's science, technology, engineering, and maths, we are short of over 500,000 specialists that need to fill this gap so that we can use these skilled workers to create better business value. I think we had a question in the Q&A. Okay, so Kamel has posted, I wasn't really sure what it means. This is why I'm here. Pictures like China with cameras everywhere coming up. Good, yeah. We're going to get into that AI recognition in a minute and how cameras and technology is actually collecting this big data. On the one hand, it's quite scary, but on the other hand, we can really use this to our advantage and improve our lives. And only 13 of the 500 individuals listed as CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies, we had females. This is a scary statistic. And of those 13 females, all of them were white. So very, very scary statistics here showing that in the space of big data and big data companies that use big data, there isn't enough diversity and inclusion taking place. We also see in America that gender representation is not abiding to the standards of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Only 25% of these companies are actually adhering to female quota, and even a smaller minority of those are people of color. So what do we do about it? Why do we believe that inclusion in big data is so important? Well, if we don't get women and people of color at the table, real technologists doing the real work, we will have bias systems. So we know that already in our societies, in our cultures, there's a lot of bias that exists, but those have been transferred into our technology systems. And if we don't get the right people helping design those systems and implement those systems, then it's going to be close to impossible if we don't change it in the next 1 to 2 decades to fix that or to remove that bias from our systems. So we all have an active role to play, and there are many places where bias occurs from big data. I asked the question now, and please feel free to add this into the chat. Do you think we can remove bias completely from big data? Can it be completely avoided? And if so, what are your thoughts on that? How do you think we can do that? Do you think bias happens intentionally or unintentionally in data design, data collection? And which is more impacting on our lives? Do you think it's the intentional or unintentional? I'll give you our thoughts. I don't think it can completely be avoided. It's really, really hard to remove a bias entirely from big data. There is unconscious bias that occurs, and then there's obviously bias that occurs then intentionally or unintentionally in data design, collection, and analysis. Sometimes data bias is intentional and needed. For instance, if you want to look at a specific target segment and how they behave, and you're trying to gain insights about a specific segment, then of course you would, in your data design and collection, put a specific preference there for gender, race, and so on, so that you can get an understanding of those people's pain points and how you can address that then with services and products to meet their needs. Unintentional bias is where it gets a little bit dangerous. I will go into some examples of where we've had unintentional bias in our society, but it happens every single day in almost every set of big data. And this is really the part that's most impacting on our lives. So some examples of where this has happened unintentionally, but has caused big impact on our lives, is something like historical bias. So in 2008, I think it was, there was a massive trend on Google image searches to find CEO pictures or images of female CEOs. But because society had never changed the bias to employ more females into their CEO positions, there was simply not the data in the database to be found. So it was a conundrum that historical bias in society created a bias in data searches for us. There's also racial and unconscious bias. This is to the topic or the question or comment that was put into the Q&A, that in China and in many other countries obviously use a lot of facial recognition. We, on all of our, most on our mobile devices now, as a security precaution on our banking apps, we use facial recognition. And there's a very interesting Netflix documentary called Decoded Bias. And this was really where an African-American female went to a company and was working in a highly secure environment and needed to use her facial recognition to access all of her business applications and all her work applications. It did not recognize her face until she put on a white mask. So she then dug a bit deeper and created this very interesting documentary, but it just showed that, I mean, if you look at the top tech companies that are all founded in Silicon Valley, majority of them have been founded by white males. And these white males are designing these applications and coming up with these concepts for their businesses. And that bias never gets removed when these companies grow from startup into large, big tech companies. So when we create these things, obviously we need to keep in mind that who are the people that are going to be using these applications and technology, and how can we engineer that to be most inclusive as possible. We also get the brilliance bias. I've just spoken in the facts already about the STEM gap. There's this wonderful book called The Invisible Woman, and that's really to frame it in a way that we live in a man's world. And this is, again, unintentional, that majority of market research that was done, for instance, on vehicles' motor safety, like a safety belt, a seat belt, was created and has been ergonomically designed to fit male frames and ergonomics, which actually was caught in the motor vehicle industry, luckily enough, because this was actually resulting in some safety factors for individuals that landed up in motor vehicle accidents and weren't particularly properly secured because their frame might have been a bit smaller or their ergonomics were a bit different to those of the average male. The Invisible Woman also touches a lot on how our bias in our world has really sort of taken that glamorousness of women away. We all have bias to female leaders, leaders of color, women of color in leadership positions. And we, by default and by unconscious and unintentional bias, believe that scientists, doctors, and all of the STEM roles should be, or even women, take it more credible that if men are in these positions, they would be more trusting of a male doctor versus in a female doctor. So we definitely need to do a lot of work there to take the bias out of these systems. If you have experienced bias or witnessed any bias in big data and have noticed it in any of your applications or working with big data, please feel free to share. I think we have a comment. Christina says she's getting goosebumps. That's great. Yeah, as I said, big data is a topic that affects everybody and not just those that are data literate. We've also got another comment from Alfonso. I think data reflects the bias in society and the risk for data to become an unintended tool for normalization. Great comments, Alfonso. Thank you for that contribution. Andreas Müller, I think we should focus more on the ability in removing bias already present in existing data models, because a complete avoidance from the start isn't possible, as you said. Completely true, Andreas. It cannot be 100% eliminated, and that's why it's so important to keep this awareness about it and be conscious of where we can be in control and intentional of removing that bias where necessary. So yeah, I think I've given enough goosebumps maybe, or framed it enough to show how impactful big data is on our lives. And that's why inclusion in this area is so important, not just from the companies that employ diverse people, but how big data is designed, managed, interpreted, and then used within companies. We believe that this is important because it contributes to so many aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But we sit with a paradox. We cannot be inclusive if we're not diverse. So if you're not hiring diverse teams, putting diverse teams together in your data science divisions, or selecting companies that can assist you with diverse data science teams, then we will never get to inclusive data. So there's so much beyond our personality, whether we are blue, red, green, or yellow personality. There are so many layers and dimensions. I think Donkey said this on the Shrek movie, where he said it's like, you're like an onion, you know, we've got layers. And yeah, this is what makes us diverse. It goes so much more beyond our personality. It could be our age, how we were brought up, where we were born, firstborn, secondborn, lastborn. There's so many dimensions to this, and there's so many books and thought leadership written on this whole diversity space, but no one has ever really concretely, how can I say, scientifically formulated it in a way that there's a one-size-fits-all. We're just as unique as our fingerprints in our diversity. But just like without diversity, you can't get inclusion, you also need to create a space for equity. So there are three facets that come together to create inclusion. These work interdependently to each other, but they are all different. Many companies confuse diverse, so if they hire 50% female, they think they're both diverse and inclusive. This is not the case, and the same goes for equity. So diversity is obviously how we differ. That is shown here by the different colored dots. Equity means that all those colors have equal and fair treatment and equal opportunity. But inclusion means that we all have the power and a voice in those decision-making authority groups, and every aspect and every perspective is considered and heard when businesses are making decisions. I also mentioned equality and equity in some of my previous slides, but if we are not when we are inclusive of our diversity, we can also create equity. Again, here, there's often the misconception that equality and equity is the same thing. That's not the case. As we can see on this left-hand side of this visual, we can see that if everybody is treated with the same amount of support, we still have inequality when you look at the green bars. So what do we need? We need diverse support so that we can create equity. That means perhaps people of color need more support to get their voices heard and their opinions and perspectives being brought into decision-making processes, or then disabled people need also a certain amount of support, but less so, and the same goes for females. So that eventually all of these diverse and minority groups come onto the same level where those that are in more privileged and majority groups are sitting, and we all have fair and equitable treatment. I don't know if anybody's seen these sort of analogies before, but this has been a great piece for me in understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And unfortunately, the equity part is often left out of many companies' D&I committees or job titles, but it's a very important component. And the reason for this is that if we don't have these three legs or these three spheres of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we cannot create a sense of belonging for those that are in society, in companies, in communities, and so forth. So we'd love to hear in the comments if a colleague or a company has ever made you feel like you belong, and how did they do that? so that we can all learn about how we can create a more belonging society and environment for those around us. So to sum it up, before I hand over to Lena soon, the benefit here, and this is why, again, we chose this topic for the session, is that companies with more inclusive business cultures and policies see a 59% increase in innovation. That's outstanding. So we've done some exercises before. There've been case studies where people were given an empty egg carton and they gave it to a diverse group of people and said, create something. And every single person in that group created something different, from a caterpillar to a handbag, to whatever it may be. And it's the same things that happens in companies and cultures, that if you're not creating diverse groups to work on certain projects and tasks, then we will not get that innovation and that creativity coming through from people who have different perspectives, different realities, different backgrounds, different understandings. So this also then results for us as the end consumer, or people of the public, that we get also a much improved assessment of what our interests and needs are, and then get the products and services that actually meet our demands. So I will now pass over to Lena, who will then tell you about how we as individuals can be more inclusive and what we can do also as companies. Thank you, guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lena, and very happy to be here today. Thanks, Colleen, for the introduction. And it's fine, I think.
Are you?
Yeah. And thanks for the invitation from Diversity Stories That Matter to be here today. And I'm gonna talk to you guys about how we as individuals can become more inclusive today. To start off, I want to show you some interesting facts about career development in big data. First of all, we are nowadays, or also in the times of social media platforms, always looking a lot what others are doing, and kind of comparing and seeing where am I standing, self-reflecting where others standing. And important to know there is that all genders are biased to those who self-promote. That means that everybody is biased when seeing somebody else who's self-promoting, and you just have to step one step back and see yourself in this whole environment to see that it's not that you're jealous, but you need to self-reflect and position yourself in there. And the other bias to this is that people who don't practice the self-promotion are often held back from progressing in their career path. So that you always have to wait up whether you self-promote and get some bias, or whether you stand up for yourself and progress in your career. Another interesting fact is that companies that invest in diversity, equity, inclusion are actually more profitable when having women on the leadership board. But how can we get there when looking at the fourth fact, which says that men apply for jobs when they meet only 60% of the qualifications, but women apply only if they meet 100%. So we see a large bias, and all the four facts can be seen in an environment of application, self-positioning, gender bias. So I think we need to look at this closer. To frame the fourth fact, I want to show you this study, which was pretty surprising for me when I've seen it. And important to know there is that you see a bias between men and women, and men and women gave the reasons why they did not apply for a job. And the three key messages out of this visual you can see there are that you see a bias in some work environments, and women do need to meet more of the qualifications to be hired than their male colleagues do. What it's pretty surprising, because I think we are all qualified equally. And another reason for this large bias is that girls are strongly socialized always in school or in university, and also in their childhood, to follow the rules and to their better rule following. You always have this in mind. Girls are probably doing their homework and boys are doing their fun stuff in their free time. And I think this bias has to be removed, definitely, because we are all doing fun stuff, but we are all doing our homework in our school time. So yeah, this is very important to keep in mind. And the third reason why we see this big bias here is that historically, when we look back, degrees always have played a different role for women than for men. And nowadays, or from the past until now, I think that we see that women see their workplace more orderly than men. So we also see a big difference there. And the fourth reason for this big bias is that we may overestimate the importance of our formal training and qualifications and underutilize advocacy and networking. So we all have the chance to do some self-learnings, grow, and all the other things you can do, workshops, self-education, read books. And this is not taken into account when looking at this graphic. And what can we do as women or minority groups in general to remove the bias and to become more inclusive? Of course, nowadays we have the big opportunity to self-promote ourselves via those mass communication platforms like LinkedIn, Xing. We can host our own podcast. We can be guests in a podcast. We can have blogs. We can promote ourselves via company newsletters and position ourselves like that. Like you've seen before in the slide, always apply for the job, even though you're not 100% match or you think you're not 100% match, because we have a long recruiting process behind each application, which is not only framed by job qualifications, but by a lot of other aspects which need to be taken into account. Participate in communities or movements like Women in Big Data, or like we are today in Diversity Stories That Matters. Build allyships with like-minded people, or be an ally for people. Listen to them or speak up, and use your knowledge to inform others about your actions and be accountable. And always remember that your diversity is your superpower and you can make others feel included. Another important question we wanted to ask today, or we also want to ask you in the chat, if you have any answers to this, please write them in the chat. How can big data employers become more inclusive? Do you have an idea? Do you have something in mind? Just write it in the chat. We found some best practices for being an inclusive employer. First of all, it's important that employers need to understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not the same thing, but they work all together, like Colleen explained before in her slides, that they create belonging. It's important that employers create a platform and a voice for minority groups, for example, D&I committees or other workshops you can offer there. And be open and listen to your employees and aim to understand all the different and diverse perspectives from your employees. And of course, providing opportunities to them, and always remain accountable and adopt a growth mindset. We at OneLogic, we also have a D&I committee, and you can see all the fabulous people who are in there on that slide. And we are all volunteers from diverse departments like software, data science, UX and UI, product management, release management, all departments you can think of. And we are coming from different backgrounds with different cultural backgrounds, different ages, and we are gathering to, align on different topics. And that's what we do. We meet twice a month and we are discussing different topics. We define actions, and we're trying to make our company more diverse and inclusive. For example, we're conducting surveys, we are reviewing job descriptions, we're signing up for events like we've done today with you, and moderating communication tools that nobody feels left out there. Yeah, so I just spoke about what we achieved so far, but we didn't achieve that as D&I, we achieved that as a whole company. And for OneLogic, I can say that we are very happy to have around 200 employees from more than 25 countries, which is great, I think. We are living out of that cultural diversity. And we're also trying to remove this bias when recruiting. For example, we have 3 interviews in data science department with 3 different colleagues and a neutral evaluation guidelines to assess hard and soft skills there. So there shouldn't be there shouldn't be any bias at all when recruiting. And we're offering diverse company benefits. We are really emphasizing that we want to have part-time and taking off kids for men and women equally. We're removing language barriers by having English as our main company language. And we're having clear and transparent career paths for all, and also training budgets and a transparent salary grid. So we have no gender pay gap. Women and men are paid equally. And we're offering workshops and participation there. And if you want to find out more about us or collaborate with us, have any questions, want to connect with Colleen or myself via LinkedIn, have a deep dive, another session with us, just contact us via this marketing email address I just wrote down here. And now we're really happy to go into discussion with you guys.
This is not a question. I would like to share a point that I really liked how the equity was described. I think it's a really important distinction, that important thing that everyone has to know. Personally, coming from a different background, I often have to push myself to talk in a meeting, especially as a junior developer. I have 2 experiences. I've been in a group where I've been asked to talk, which actually motivates my confidence, and I know people are listening to me, which often my ideas are proven to be more. When this happens, they are more. I have more confidence, and it has led to a positive meeting. And in a different situation where as a junior in the same position in a different situation where it is not negative, I'm not discouraged from being here, but I felt like my voice was not heard. So it was mainly a topic where I would like to say, but there was not enough time for me or enough gap where I could put my voice. So I just put my mic on mute most of the time. So I think it's important to push someone, to motivate someone to talk, to make them confident, and so they could contribute more as well.
Completely agree. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. It does take a lot of bravery and courage as somebody in a minority group to stimulate that inclusion and diversity in a company, to fight for those equitable opportunities. It's not easy, and that's why it's so important that those who've perhaps been on that journey already or have built up their confidence, have learned how to self-promote, have contributed to more inclusive discussions, support those around us. And it's so important for those that are in privileged positions and in majority groups to check their privilege and always be willing to learn and listen and self-improve. It's a journey. There's, I don't think, a finite state for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're learning and growing as a global community day in and day out. There are obviously things that catalyze this or spark it on to be more prevalent and more important, like Black Lives Matters. And yeah, it's not an easy thing, and I can only encourage those that are in minority groups, try it out. Sometimes we fail, sometimes it's really hard and we get blocked by systems and individuals that have bias, but just keep going on, keep fighting. More often than not, in the majority of cases, it's going to be worthwhile and will be for your own benefit and for those who are also in the same minority group. So we've got a question in the Q&A from Lucia. How would you apply your very good ideas in different working scenarios like shop floor or logistics centers, different working environments, but also other workforce than white-collar office workers? Yeah, so that's a great question. It doesn't only affect, let's say, the corporate world, but obviously, how do we look at different industries like retail and so on? How can we be more inclusive? So I can maybe speak from the minority group as a working mom, a full-time working mom, that when I go to the grocery store or go to a retail outlet, that I perhaps want things really accessible. So certain commodities that I use on a regular basis, and I maybe have the kids in the car and just quickly need to jump into the shop and grab essentials on my way home. That would be a great thing, that people understand that nuance, that minority group has that specific pain points, and they can merchandise and stock their shelves accordingly. There's obviously also the other thing about people of color. I mean, if we look at the cosmetic industry, how hair products and cosmetic products, from makeup to hair products, are completely biased in European countries, that they're not stocking the things for the diverse populations that are now existing in our communities and cities. Germany is getting more colorful by the day, and I don't think that the FMCG world has really caught up to those demands and those specific needs of the minority groups. I hope that answers your question, Lucia, but if it hasn't, please feel free to write again in the post into the chat. I think we've got 3 minutes left if anybody else still has a question. Thank you, Lucia. So with when you were saying logistics centers, there's obviously also the other thing to look at supply and demand. With the business value that you can create out of data science and big data analysis, one of these things are these forecasting predictions. So you can look at historical data and see that specific products have been bought at specific times by certain minority groups, and then you can obviously optimize your supply chain accordingly. So an example would be there's a high demand for a pink lipstick at the DM outlets in Munich, and therefore those need to be stocked more regularly because those minority groups shop at specific outlets and would need to go into those stores and find their products that meet their specific needs. So that's just a very casual example. Alfonso is asking, how can we address data biases with clients to be more inclusive in the analysis or solutions built? Thank you, Alfonso, for your question. That's a very sensitive topic sometimes, or controversial. I think that's where really the consultation part comes in. Firstly, as those that are consulting the client need to be aware of where bias can occur in data. So whether it be in the data design, in the collection or the analysis, or how that is then interpreted into a product or service, there are these different aspects that one can look at and say, where could there be possible bias, and consult the client accordingly to say, we need to keep these things aware. Are these things that we intentionally want to include or exclude in our data design, collection, and analysis? Or is it something that could cause an unconscious or unintentional bias for us that could create problems in supply and demand of the product and the service? I hope that answered the question, but please, again, if you totally agree, Christine, inclusion is definitely a human right. It's so sad that this doesn't happen automatically in our societies. And as a South African who's lived through apartheid and come from a mixed race background, I can personally empathize with this and feel it on a very deep and personal level, that it's outstanding that in 2021, this is still an issue that we've been fighting for. If we look at the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement, these are protests and things that have been going on in America for years. Why does it take something like George Floyd's death and tragedy to wake the world up on these matters. But I guess the silver lining is that I guess it was his life's purpose to accelerate this diversity, equity, inclusion movement and self-awareness in companies that have been far too long biased. Good. I think that's all the time we have for now. But as we said, please reach out to us. We can maybe go one slide back. There's our contact details, and please reach out to us if you want to discuss anything further, collaborate with us. We're also hiring in our team, or if you're interested in data science and looking for a data science partner for your business. Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure being with you. Bye-bye.